The argument from art makers or theater makers is that empathy is just as effective a way to convince somebody as logical, reasoned, debate positions. Welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jacob, I'm here with Jackson, and we are back as part of our themed month, Marriage Month this season. Once a season, we spend a month of episodes, sometimes 4, sometimes less, sometimes a little more. This time it's a little more episodes talking about plays that have something to do with each other, something in common. We've done whole episode, whole themed months that are about a playwright. We've done whole themed months that are about a specific time in theater, that are about a specific form of theater. But by far the most common thing for themed month is plays that share an element, a thematic element, a plot device, something like that. This season, it's Marriage Month, so 5 plays now that talk about marriage, where marriage plays a central role, where marriage is part of the plot, part of the characters, where the play maybe reflects on marriage. This is our 3rd episode of Marriage Month, so now we're going to really be able to get into those great comparative conversations. I'm here with Jackson to do it. Welcome, Jackson.
Yes, excited for the continued conversation here in Marriage Month. Excited about this conversation today. This play, The Light by Loy A. Webb, was a new play to me, so I'm excited to have the chance to engage it. And yeah, the conversations we've already been having around Marriage Month and how marriage is this sort of like pressure cooker element, this crucible element that you can deploy in a script. Oftentimes deployed as kind of like a secondary pressure cooker, but I'm loving the conversation with it as the primary source of what is kind of driving the play forward over the course of this particular themed month.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, right? Because marriages are such a an important relationship to the people in them, of course, but also like an important organizing principle for society, especially in the West. And so you sort of think of them as part of the background noise, right? And now it's not like everybody is married or has to get married or anything, but there's a lot of people that get married. And so there's a lot of marriages that you probably know about in your life. It's just sort of part of the fabric of the world at this point, right? And so, but when you're crafting a piece of art or a piece of drama, every choice is an intentional one. And so why would a playwright make 2 characters married? What does that do to the characters, to the story, to what they're trying to investigate, as opposed to being friends or being dated or whatever, right? What does the choice to include this relationship do to the story? This is our 3rd episode. We've talked about, of course, the very, very famous Romeo and Juliet, where the marriage is deployed very late in the script because of what it does to the already ratcheting up tensions of this violent conflict, right? In Barefoot in the Park, we looked at a very new marriage, and some of the play was about learning how to compromise and care within the context of that new relationship. And now, The Light, we're talking about a marriage that is yet to come. The Light is a proposal play. It begins with truly one of the most romantic and charming proposals that you could possibly imagine on stage. And then the fact of that marriage yet to come does something to the really relevant, meaningful, hard conversation that these 2 characters have to have.
Yeah, the way it kind of like swiftly flips is such a good, great like sort of like stakes raise moment of the play, and I'm excited to have the conversation about it. Before we continue our conversation, though, wanted to say thank you to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast for being a part of making things like Themed Month happen. Y'all rock! Thank you all so much for being a part of the No Script community. If you're looking for a way to help out the show or just to get involved in the show a little bit more, Patreon's a great way to do that. We have have a number of different tiers of patronship over there, and the lowest one is just $1. We're like hard set at that. We've got 13 seasons of us saying the lowest tier is $1. So that $1 amount helps us out enormously. $12 over the course of a year means that we get to keep doing things like Themed Month, means that we get to continue hosting this podcast on as many possible sites as we're able to, means that we get to keep ordering great scripts and having great conversations, special guest ons, and things like that. So special thank you to all of the patrons who have made this Themed Month happen. And if you're looking for a way to get involved in the show, to help out the show a great amount, head on over to patreon.com/noscriptpodcast, and we will see you over there.
And we have an exciting announcement about what's coming up on the podcast. As our Themed Month is sort of headed towards the back half, we still have a couple more great episodes to come. But at the conclusion of that Themed Month is very near the end of the season, and what we typically do during that time is have our special guest episode. So we are just a few episodes away from our special guest. We will announce that probably next week. Something to put on your radar. I know folks love our special guest episodes, an opportunity to have a conversation about a script with somebody that's not either Jackson or I, depending on who's hosting it in what season. So something to put on your radar. It is coming up, special guest episode. And now back to the script.
Here we go.
Okay, so Loy A. Webb, new playwright to the podcast. As far as I can tell, only 2 plays to their name. This play, The Light, and another play called His Shadow. Loy A. Webb is a Chicago-born playwright, TV writer, and attorney. Now that's sort of interesting, right? An attorney. They did their BA in political science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And actually, that experience at University of Illinois apparently factored very heavily into this play, which is an interesting, I don't know a lot more about it than that, but really interesting sort of part of their biography there. They also then went to law school at the John Marshall Law School and are a practicing lawyer. There's a great interview where they talk about this a little bit, and I just want to read one quote from it. So this is a Loy A. Webb quote. Denzel Washington said it best. Show business is 90% business, 10% show. Without the business, there is no show. Being an attorney and keeping the above quote in mind, my business is always as important as my art. Fascinating. I don't know how many, I'd have to go back and look, how many other playwrights we've discussed on the podcast are also lawyers. And, you know, it's this play is some about like evidence, is about like the way that the legal system preferences certain kinds of testimony. It's about power in society and how power and, abuse of power are held and considered based on your gender and your race. I think that's of course, it's a very interesting conversation for our society, no matter who you are. But for this like lawyerly perspective on it, I don't know. I don't know if I could express exactly how I see that come through in the play, and I didn't know it going in. But now knowing it, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah, for sure. I think that definitely kind of like bleeds through or shows its face throughout the work.
Yeah. Loy A. Webb, also a theater journalist. She's a member of the Association of Women Journalists in Chicago. Her work has been featured at the Black Ensemble Theater, as well as the American Theater Company, the 20% Theater Company, the University of North Dakota, the Modern Day Griot Theater Company in New York, the Black Lives, Black Words International Project, as well as all the other theaters that I'll read when I talk more about The Light here in a little bit. She was an inaugural Tutterow Fellow at Chicago Dramatists. You might know her TV writing if you know any of these shows. She's written for Reasonable Doubt, a show called Nosferatu, which is how I'm going to pronounce it, but it's spelled N-O S 4 A 2. And I believe you would then say Nosferatu. Don't know anything about it. Love that title because of how stinking weird it is. I just think, the weirder the better when titles are concerned. And then also another show called The Miss Pat Show. So one of the places that produced this play, The Light, is sorry, let me quick find it in my list here. the Wham Theater, which stands for Where Art and Activism Meets in Massachusetts. I only mention that because there's a great interview from that organization with Loy A. Webb about the production of the light. And this is a great question and answer I just want to provide because I just think it tells us a little bit about who this playwright is in an introduction. So the question is, what activism activists do you draw inspiration from and or want to shout out? Here's their answer. I recently bought letters that playwright Alice Childress, who I also call my literary mother, wrote her attorney. In those letters, she's discussing her concerns about taking on a particular project. She talks about how hard the business is, but not yet being able to accept a show just for money if it doesn't align with her values. Alice's words in those letters will forever be my reminder of not what I do, but why. I mean, what a cool story for this young playwright to purchase letters from Alice Childress to her attorney, this young playwright attorney. I mean, that's just awesome. And the way that she talks about how the art making that she does is not just about making, not just about doing projects that are the big buck projects, but projects that align with their values. This play certainly is a play in large part about values. And so, I mean, that comes through, I think, shining clear. It comes through, I'm trying to come up with a light metaphor, like a spotlight, like a lighthouse.
Shines through.
Something like that. This play was developed by the New Colony in Chicago, a great new play development thing. I'm not sure exactly where they are at anymore after the pandemic and the kind of slow dying of small theater companies in Chicago. It had its world premiere with them in January of 2018. That is very interesting, right? Because one of the driving cultural events early in this play is Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court hearing, where, of course, he was credibly accused as something that he did while he was in high school at this party. And he had the great, the awful sort of crying, screaming, smashing the table. I like beer, right? I'll never forget that from a Supreme Court justice. Right. But that happened, if you remember, in September of 2018. So this play had its world premiere without that cultural touchstone in it because it had not yet happened. I got to imagine, I mean, of course, what happened was horrifying. I don't want to paint it as anything other than that. But if you're Loy A. Webb and you've created this play, then to have this so clear example of exactly what you're talking about occur not just in American culture in general, but on the highest stage of American culture. In a hearing to become a Supreme Court justice, this dude gets away with it, allegedly, I guess I have to say. And so I just think that is what a thing to write a play and then have the most perfect example of what you're talking about occur in American national politics. So then it goes on to have its off-Broadway premiere. At that point, I assume the Kavanaugh stuff is part of the script at MCC Theater in New York City in February of 2019. It goes on to be really, really popular, and it's one of the plays that survives the pandemic. It has a very early production at the Shotgun Players in Berkeley in 2020, and then spans the pandemic and manages to come back to life 2021 with that Where Arts and Activism Meet Wham Theater in Massachusetts. They were doing a reading of it at that point. I'm not sure whether the reading is their specific project or if you remember, readings were really popular right after the pandemic because they were a little bit less less complicated to produce with all the stuff around theater. So I'm not sure which of those was the case for why it was a reading. 2022, Lyric Stage Company in Boston, Marquette Theater in Milwaukee, the Black Theater Troupe of Upstate New York, Horizon Theater Company in Atlanta. I might have the year on that one wrong, but Horizon Theater Company in Atlanta did it. 2023, Theater Exile in Philadelphia, Yes and Theatrical Company of Richmond, the Black Repertory Theater in St. Louis, the Ensemble Theater in Cleveland, the Chester Theater in Massachusetts. 2024, the Studio at 620 in St. Petersburg, Petersburg, and Naptown African American Theater Collective in Indianapolis. And this spring, in March and April, at the Portland Center Stage, spring 2025. If you're near around Portland, you have the chance to see The Light. The Light is really, really well reviewed, and everywhere it goes. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to come up with the name of this reviewer, but I remember one of the reviews called it the best show they'd ever reviewed locally. Now, this was probably not in New York or Chicago, one of those smaller theater communities out there, I would guess, but that is still very, very high praise. It's gotten just wonderful reviews. Got a nomination for Outstanding New Off-Broadway Play by the Outer Critics Circle, and won the Joseph Jefferson Award. Little bit of context there, hopefully an introduction to a fascinating, I guess you'd say new playwright in the sense that Loy only has 2 plays at this point, and a very popular, very well reviewed, and very, very interesting, moving, challenging two-hander.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited for the chance to kind of jump into the conversation around it, as I think it does have such a big impact. I do want to take just a moment at the beginning of the kind of synopsis or the summary portion to just note that this is a play about Black folks in America. A lot of this play has to do with specifically how the societal pressures of America show up for Black folks, and specifically this play is about Black women in America. As we like to note at the beginning of these sorts of podcasts, we just want to acknowledge that we're 2 white guys talking about this play, and thus we have a limitation on our ability to engage in these topics well. That said, we love getting to talk about theater's best scripts, and this is certainly one of those best scripts, as is often our practice. We will be linking below in our description for more branching conversations around this play. Please check out those links, and we're happy to be a spot that is talking about these plays, and happy also to promote other conversations around it as well.
Yeah, we really believe in the power of having conversations about art. So we, as has been the case throughout No Script, we're not going to shy away from having conversations about art. We believe in that, but we also don't want our conversation to be the only lens through which you view this play, especially this play, which, is not from our experience at all. And so we'd love to include these other, really hope that you take advantage of that. We curate other conversations from folks who have other lived experiences about the play. Oftentimes lots of interviews with the playwright, reviews specifically from reviewers that don't, have a similar lived experience to Jackson and I. So a great place for you to just view the play from a different lens and then go out and have your own conversations about it, which is really what No Script is all about from the beginning, encouraging conversations, encouraging reading plays, because not everybody can go see 4 great plays a week, so you have to read them. And this is I'm sure it's a great play to see. I haven't been able to see it, but it's a play that I think reads really, really well, and you should definitely read it because it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. That said, additionally, we would like to just note at the beginning of this conversation that this play has some particular topics in it that we wanted to warn you about as we go into the conversation, just so you're aware of them as we go in. This play does deal with sexual assault, does deal with rape, and does deal with that oppression of the kind of societal oppression of Black folks in America. So if that doesn't sound like what you want to be engaging today, that's totally all right. We have a number of great other podcasts for you to listen to, but that said, we're going to jump into the conversation with those themes in mind. Now, I'm going to real quick summarize this play for us. I wanted to just real quick read a little bit of a review from the New York Times and a review by Alexis Solosky to kind of jump us into it. She says, this is a tear-struck thesis play proposing, with echoes of Zora Neale Hurston, that as Genesis says, Genesis is the main character of the play, Black women are at the bottom of virtually everything in society, their labor undervalued, their hurt unrecognized, they deserve to be heard and seen and believed, not because they are someone's wife or mother or daughter, but because they are human beings. That is a huge through line of this play, and it comes in right away at the beginning. I don't know how this would be kind of shared in a theater space, but the pre-script of this play is from Loy A. Webb, and it reads, "For every Black woman or girl that has been through darkness, I hope this play is the light you have so desperately been praying for." So with that as our context, we jump into this play. This play is centered on Genesis and Rashad. I'll read you their character descriptions here real quick. An African-American woman, this is Genesis. An an African-American woman, natural hair, mid to late 30s, and Rashad, an African-American man, mid to late 30s. This play takes place in Chicago, Illinois, in October 5th of 2018, and it's a auspicious day for this couple. It is the anniversary, their kind of dating anniversary, but more importantly, this play, not more importantly, integrally importantly with that, this play is about a proposal gone awry, because at the top of the play we discover that Rashad is going to be proposing today. He's in Genesis's house before she arrives home. We see him kind of hold the ring, hide it away. We find out pretty quickly that we're in for a proposal. And she arrives back home after a busy day at work, and it begins this kind of negotiation over do you remember the day? Is it our anniversary, etc. begins, and pretty quickly we move into a reflection on their relationship and the fact that it's their dating anniversary. Rashad kind of tells this story, tries to slowly work up to his proposal. All the while, there's some very loving kind of ribbing back and forth between the two of them as they describe, or as they process their days, but also get into the anniversary night. But it kind of culminates in the giving of gifts. The first gift that is given is Genesis gives Rashad season tickets to the Bears, and then the second gift that is given is the proposal. Rashad, very romantically, as Jacob already said, proposes by way of kind of sharing a letter that he wrote the night after they met. Importantly, it was when they heard a song for the first time together. They went out on this date, had this song sung by an artist, Ratima, and that song kind of is played throughout the play and is integral to their relationship. He shares this letter that he posted that night, and it's basically, I know that you're going to be my wife. If in 2 years I still feel this way, we will be married, etc. And he proposes. She says yes. It's beautiful. She then gives a little testimonial as well of like, when we went on that trip to New Orleans, we really connected. I really appreciated that. That's when I really started to trust you, and this kind of beautiful proposal happens. Then comes the second gift. This is a surprise gift. We knew at the beginning, Genesis says she has 2 gifts for Rashad. This is kind of a surprise gift from Rashad to Genesis, to us, the audience. It's tickets to a concert. Tickets to a concert to see Ratima sing again, the artist who they heard on their first date. However, the tickets also are at a kind of music festival that another artist, Kashif, is playing at. This is an artist that Genesis has told Rashad over and over that she's not okay with him listening to. And as she hears that this artist is playing at this particular festival, she more and more is against it. She right away says, we can't go. I'm sorry, I can't support how he talks about women in his songs. And so there's a long negotiation around that and some conversation around that. Slowly we find out a little bit more about why she has some resistance to this artist. Is because she knew him in college. She says that a friend of hers was actually sexually assaulted and raped by this artist. And that engages another negotiation between Rashad and Genesis as he kind of like tries to suss out, well, the kind of pattern of what did she say? What did he say? What's the evidence? And Genesis says, why can't you just believe me? And they go back and forth. They continue to fight around this with the stakes of this was a night that Rashad had planned as part of their anniversary and the proposal to go see this artist that they saw the first night that they were dating. However, it's marred by the involvement of this other artist. And though that they do a lot of great activistic work, Genesis continues that she cannot support him as a result of the way he sings about women, raps about women, and has treated women that she knew. Ultimately, this builds into a large enough fight that the night is about to be kind of ruined, essentially. Or not ruined, but like they're not going to go to the concert. Rashad starts to leave, and kind of angry and saying, okay, I'll give you some space, but we're clearly not going to find a way past this tonight. And what is revealed in that kind of final moment as he's walking away, Genesis says, it wasn't a friend, it was actually me. And we find out that the kind of story that she'd been telling about friends, sexual assault, was actually her story at the hands of this artist. That changes the conversation again. Rashad begins to kind of re-step over. There's some more negotiation about how, like, what level of hypocrisy that is, and why women's stories can't just be, specifically Black women's stories, can't just be believed at face value. It has to be about, oh, well, my wife or my son, my family had this story. And so what ends, we'll get into some of that in our kind of continued conversation, but what it ends up as is Rashad is trying to find some way to still stay. Genesis is saying you have to go tonight. Rashad continuously kind of gets close to going, but says he doesn't want to go. He wants to fight for their relationship. He says, well, you told me you had a second gift for me. At least give me the second gift. He refuses to leave. He goes and digs through the apartment, finds the second gift, and the second gift is a onesie for a child that's kind of football themed. Rashad is a former football player. Again, he's a big fan of the Bears. And we discover that the other gift that Genesis was going to give Rashad that night was to let him know that she was pregnant. And so, again, the stakes are kind of raised. There's another beat towards recommittal or not, wondering whether or not Genesis is going to ask Rashad to leave, whether or not Rashad is going to leave. A final beat happens of Rashad kind of being at the door, and Genesis tells him to wait. And he returns back into the room. There's this kind of touching, just an unspoken unspoken dialogue, as it were. There's no lines, however, they have this shared moment together of them together still, and that's how the play ends.
Totally. I mean, it would be a major, I would guess, rehearsal discovery to figure out what exactly is that last image. What is the story that is happening between these two characters? Is the story that they are going to, be together? Is the story that they're not, but he's going to be their supporter? That's certainly what's in the lines. I don't know. And I think you would have to, it probably would depend on the production and your own sort of lived experience, what you read in that final picture. I assume that the leaving that up to the actors and the director to communicate so clearly is an intentional choice on behalf of Loy A. Webb. A couple of things that I think maybe are important too. Early in the play, one of the very first sort of back and forths they have before the gifts start is that Genesis talks about how she's a principal at a school, right? And it's a all-black charter school, and a bunch of the teachers that just this day came to her and were upset because one of their co-workers, a white woman who was hired to teach at this building, had posted on her social media account a kind of pretty aggressive defense of Brett Kavanaugh during those hearings. The same kind of thing I'm sure many of you out there know that you probably read on social media about how it's all a liberal witch hunt and, discrediting Ford and all of that kind of stuff. And the teachers come to the principal and want Genesis to fire this teacher because of what they posted in support of Brett Kavanaugh. And Genesis says, I don't believe that. And I now have lost a lot of respect for this teacher, but I don't know that I can fire them. And Rashad's point very early, I think it's a really interesting point given what comes later in the play, as he says, he sort of encourages her to consider firing her. Basically, his argument is, what if in a school like this, we need teachers who we can trust to be there for the students. So here's a little bit of what Rashad says. She's essentially saying, regardless of Ford's credible testimony, she doesn't believe her. And that makes me think, what if one of her students comes to her with a story like Ford's? Thinking as their teacher, she'd be their safe haven. Will she dismiss them too? As a teacher, especially teaching in an all-black charter school, it's her job to be mentally aligned with what's good for the students in their community. So very early on, Rashad has this point of view, right? Which is that this teacher has a responsibility to be there and be somebody that believes their students. This, I think, ends up paying off in terms of the storytelling in two interesting ways. One of them is, of course, that Rashad ends up very much not being that person when Genesis brings this story to him. But the other way is that Genesis tells this story at the very, very end when she has a long monologue where she reveals all these things that happened to her about a teacher that she went to at the university when this happened to her that basically encouraged her to keep it quiet because of the damage that this kind of accusation might do within the small black community at this largely white college that she went to. And the teacher says something to the effect of, let karma pay him back. So Genesis describes waiting all her life for karma to pay this guy back, and instead he becomes this incredibly famous, popular, successful musician and producer, very much the opposite of karma paying him back.
Yeah, and I think that element is some of what that kind of prescript is alluding to. The sort of like lack of karmic justice in the world, especially around situations like being believed, and the question of whether or not, as a result of being believed, whether you belong. I think that is the light that that Webb is hoping to shine in this play. Is that sense of belonging, is that sense of that shared story and the ability for it to exist in the light where everyone can see it, as opposed to kind of consistently being swept into the darkness.
Yeah. Another thing that I think, lends is we're just thinking about why does Loy A. Webb give this conversation to these two characters in particular, right? And you've described some, and she's very clear about this in interviews, that part of what she's doing is recentering this hashtag Me Too story, right? Which is how it's often described in the press and in the interviews. She's recentering it around Black women. She makes Genesis the sort of center voice for this discussion. I think that is definitely clear in the script. But there's also these characters that have these particular lived experiences. So Rashad, we learn sort of late in the play, had a former partner of his accuse him of domestic battery falsely. And as a result of that accusation, he was kicked off of the football team and, was not able to go play professionally. Apparently he, and Genesis seems to maybe agree with this, was potentially good enough to play professionally, but lost that opportunity due to this false accusation that took years to clear his name of. And so you get this person who comes to this conversation with that particular backstory and lived experience.
Yeah, and the way that ends up kind of feeding into the question of believing, right? And you have the kind of I think what's interesting about this play is that the two of them are on stage the whole time. I have more to say about that later, but the two of them are on stage the whole time, and we're getting them talking to each other in real time. And so you get to sit there as the audience and hear them both negotiating their story with each other and the degree to which each other believes each other in real time. And I think that's some of, like, again, the sort of beating heart of this is the two of them and trying to find a way forward together while trying to find what aspects of their story to believe in each other.
Yeah, one thing that Rashad says, which becomes kind of a refrain for the basically the last 4 or 5 pages of the play, once Genesis reveals that it was her. But so this is just prior to that revelation, where Rashad still thinks it was her friend, and his, the sort of the argument that he's making, or the point of view that he's expressing, is that these accusations do particular damage in the Black community. White people can survive an unsubstantiated allegation. I want to be really clear, and I think I'm speaking for both Jack and I in saying that credible, we're certainly on the side of believing victims who come forward with these testimonies. But now we're speaking of, like, on a larger evidentiary, substantiated sort of perspective, like all the controversy that happened around the Kavanaugh hearing, which is why that's at the beginning of the play. And Rashad's point of view is basically these unsubstantiated, while credible, unsubstantiated allegations do damage in the Black community, because people are the white culture at large is just looking for a way to take down successful Black people. And so his point of view is, well, Kavanaugh survived that. He's literally a Supreme Court justice. He's one of the 9 most powerful people in the country, maybe 10 if you include the president, And so he survived that. But Black celebrities, politicians, et cetera, don't. And that's unfair. So we have to be particularly careful with those accusations. That's the point of view he's expressing. It's not really my place to agree or disagree with that one way or the other, but that's his point of view, right? And so what he says is, this is the quote that becomes kind of a refrain. They're talking about whether they should still go to the concert or not. Genesis says, Rashad, going, period, is saying we support a rapist. Rashad says, no, it doesn't. If this was an election and he was running for mayor, then sure. Let's boycott, let's fight the power, call Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. We don't want a rapist as mayor. But this is just a concert, Jen. Here's the quote. It ain't worth marching over, baby. Which is a powerful line that is painful to hear. And I think certainly I could sort of feel where this was going to go then as that line gained some power. Because then when Genesis reveals that it was actually happened to her, she is able to give that line right back to him, right? Her point of view then becomes basically, you just said it's not worth marching over. I'm not worth marching over.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And as kind of the foil to that, Genesis's position of the we cannot support, like, blanket not support is its own position of, like, if there is any call, certainly from her perspective, there's a very definite call to not trust someone as a result of how they've behaved in the world. The move towards support in any way, whether that's attending, even attending a festival that they're only one of the acts at, a headlining act, but one of the acts at, is a move in support of that person, and navigating that dynamic, especially in the world of celebrity, in the world of celebrity politicians, and that whole process is the kind of posture that she takes, that it's better to blanket or not blanket, but like not support in any way if you know that there is a facet of a person that is not that is vile in some way, honestly. And so the way that those two positions interact between Genesis and Rashad is like much of, especially the second act of the play is interesting in that way. There's kind of the pre-concert tickets era of the play,
Yeah.
and then there's the post-concert tickets.
And the pre
era
is
of the
not
play.
just like a short, introduction before the inciting incident. Like if you were to consider this play in that traditional formulaic plot structure, it probably doesn't hold up in that way. But if you did,
Yeah.
I don't think you could consider the concert tickets the inciting incident, because it's too late in the play. It's probably the first half of the play is prior to the concert tickets coming up.
Yeah, no, I agree, and so you kind of have to, but it is certainly a complicating action that really like shifts the conversation of the play substantially. I think though, I think it is wise to not make that the inciting incident, because I think the inciting incident is the fact that it's their anniversary and that they love each other, and that the giving of the gifts to each other of the evening, especially the second gifts, the proposal,
Yes.
the proposal, and but then Genesis' second gift as well, though it comes rather late in the play, the intent of the giving of the gift, letting him know that she's pregnant with their child. Those are the bookends of this piece, is their relationship. And so I think finding that complicating action in the middle of the tickets is what raises the stakes for the relationship.
Right, no, totally, because it's interesting in some ways. You sort of learn what the inciting incident was at the end, when the gift of the baby clothes, which is Jen's way of saying that she's pregnant, when that's revealed, suddenly you go back and understand why all of this occurred, right? And I think you think from the beginning that it's just about the proposal, and it is about the proposal. I mean, I want to be clear.
Right.
I think you sort of right. One of the questions that you always want to ask, right, is why today? Why is this play happening today? This is a secret that Genesis has kept since she was in college, which I believe they say was 17 years ago. I could be wrong about that, but they're in their late 30s according to the character descriptions. And I believe they said it was 17 years ago they were in college. So that is a long time to keep any secret, but especially a secret that is so devastating. And so why does the secret come out today? Apparently, they've talked about this artist before many times. I mean, they both are aware of everybody's positions on it. Now, maybe you say, well, it's because Rashad wants to put pressure. He has a particular forcing the issue that's happening because of the concert tickets, and that's certainly true. But it might also be because now Genesis knows, well, not only am I pregnant, and we're going to have a child together, and that becomes a lot of what that last monologue is about, but also, are we going to be married, right? In this play, the marriage serves to raise the stakes of this conversation, to give the characters not just and they're already high stakes, right? But to give them stakes in each other's point of view is maybe a different way to say that. Not just that they're two figures arguing for certain ways of interpreting political or cultural events, but that they both have a vested interest in finding some common ground, right? I mean, other than just like, when you have, I don't know how often you out there have conversations with people who think so divergently than you on this kind of an issue. Like this is an issue on which I have a hard time having like a reasonable conversation. Like I love to debate politics and I do that a lot, but on this issue of rape and abuse, it's almost, I find it very difficult to try to convince somebody of the perspective of believing victims and wanting to support, and being anti sexual assault, right? I get too angry. It's too emotional for me. And so maybe you out there echo that or not. But by placing these two characters as people who are planning to get married, now there is a level of something that keeps this conversation crucial between them, right? It's not just we have different perspectives. I don't want to talk about this anymore, which is how I usually engage with people who
Sure.
have divergent thoughts about this, terrible thing. But they have a reason to try to win the other over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's whether or not they can continue to move forward with a marriage as a result of them winning each other over or not. A brief aside before we return to that so that we can bring the conversation into Marriage Month, but exactly what you're talking about I think is why theater is so important for these conversations.
Yes.
Because debate has limitations. There are very good people who can debate, and the ability to convince people of your argument is a valid skill. But I think the biggest thing that does convince people of that gets people to actually change their position is story. And when you connect the story of someone real to people, I think that's when you start to see change happen. So that I think is the gift of this play in particular, is the centering of that story. And also a gift of theater is the ability to go and see a story in front of you, and by engaging someone else's story, hopefully and very probably change can occur. So just a brief aside about why theater is awesome and why this play is.
You're totally
so
right, right? It's empathy. That it's the empathy of a human being with a particular lived experience that then has a point of view. And that is where hopefully some of the point of view of changing an audience's mind can be particularly, you might be able to have a better debate just by finding two people who can remain calm, unlike me, and sort of address the complicating factors of this issue. But I think that the argument from art makers or theater makers is that empathy is just as effective a way to convince somebody as logical, reasoned, debate positions. And I think Loy A. Webb, certainly, here's another quote I wanted to provide from the interview. This one, she was asked sort of particularly about why doing this play with these characters who are about to get married, why do that? So relevant in Marriage Month. She says, "What came to me first was I knew I wanted it to be a couple. I just felt like it was fertile ground to explore this conversation. And what surprised me was how much I fell in love with the love story of these two characters. As I wrote the beginning, I just kept being like, wow, I love them for each other. And despite what I'm about to send them through, I am rooting for their love." And so that's what's, I think one of the there's a lot of interesting dramaturgical choices, but one of them is that the audience sees Rashad with the ring as the first thing, right? The first thing we see on stage is him hiding these gifts. We see him looking at the ring. That sets us up to be with Loy A. Webb in rooting for their love from the very beginning. It's not a surprise to us that he's proposing because we've been like, he's got the ring. When is the proposal happening?
Right.
From the very, very beginning, we're on the side of the relationship just by seeing this dude with the ring. And then, of course, just truly the most romantic proposal you can possibly imagine.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, the way that the relationship is shown for the beautiful thing that it is right away from the beginning, you have hints of that. Certainly throughout the scenes, there's particular stage directions that note that all of the sort of like joshing or critique that is thrown, it is all like based in love and the like charisma of these two characters together. You feel the love of their relationship. And to kind of bring it into the broader perspective or the broader conversation around Marriage Month, I think that's one of the like really cool things about this script, is you kind of the kind of visceral nowness of discovering the information. I said it earlier, neither of the characters ever leave stage. We're always with them, or I mean, never leave the house. One character does, Genesis does walk off to the room at one point and kind of leave the stage, but they're always, no one ever leaves the building. There's never a scene apart from each other. They're always in conversation with each other. And I think that's a big difference between the plays that we've discussed so far. Romeo and Juliet, there's tons of scenes where we get one character or the other together, or just completely other characters in general. Barefoot in the Park is the same thing. You get many scenes where one of the other characters isn't there. So I think that is one of the big differences of this play, and I think one of the reasons it feels so visceral and you can get so on their team so fast is because it's an all court push or a full court press. There we go. There's the actual analogy. Full court press of their relationship that we get to just be in the whole time.
Plus, it's also like an elevating factor for the characters in terms of elevating the tension, right? Because these are not characters that have had a lot of time to ponder all of these things together, right? Of course, Genesis has been pondering this for all of these years. But like, for example, a different sort of version of a comparable play would be the proposal and then a scene break. And then a later scene sometime later where Genesis has chosen to reveal all of this or whatever, right? But because the characters are going through, I mean, in a 70-minute span, from the highest heights of romantic, I want to be with you forever. These beautiful stories, as you described. Rashad has this incredible letter that he sent right after their first date. Genesis tells this incredible story about their vacation to New Orleans, right? The highest heights of let's be together forever. I'm so in love. You're my person, right? To this, then they go through minute by minute this change, this putting all of the chips on the table, and the characters have to react in real time to that. This is not a logical, reasoned, it's in the heights of emotion is when this conversation is had. There's no distance that's allowed for by the context of the play.
Yeah, no, it keeps them together, and I think the stakes towards the end, you start to really feel the danger of that going away. Kind of consistent, or towards the end, there's this real question of when will there be a beat of this play where one of these characters leaves in such a way that they can't come back or they won't come back. And I think there's just this like we have that same beat of relief when Genesis kind of calls out to Rashad one more time at the end of the play, and in that act invites him to stay and not to have to leave. And so there, I think all the way to the last line of the play, there, because we've been with them together the whole time, there's that relief of, oh, they are still together at the end of the play.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we're supposed to believe they're going to be together in a romantic way. Certainly, the text is that Rashad says, I value you, Jen, and I believe you, and I want to be there not as your man, but because you deserve it. That's I think the last thing that he says. But then he makes his exit. He says he's going to give her space, and she calls him back. So again, it'd be interesting to see maybe 3 different versions of this play.
Yeah.
See how the actors and the director handle what that final moment communicates. There's so much. I mean, this play is just so much more there, and so much that Jackson and I are not the right authorities to talk on. And so, I want to send you again to the show notes. Look at some of these other conversations that are happening around the play. There's a lot of stuff in there. This is just I find it a moving, powerful, challenging script that Loy A has done such a good job, right? You get the heights of, just like make you cry romance, and then the heights of like real vulnerability and mistakes, right? I mean, Rashad, to his credit as a character, realizes not only that he screwed up, like in terms of he upset Genesis, but also exactly how. Right? I mean, there's a nice character revelation there. And Genesis, I think, gives him back a perfectly reasonable response, which is it's not my job to teach you this kind of stuff. I don't want to have to do
Right.
that. And there's so much of that conversation that I encourage you to follow up on with some of these other voices and lived experiences.
Yeah, definitely check out those conversations. Continue to talk about this play. Keep an eye out for when it is arriving to a theater near you, and when you have the chance to engage in those conversations. We'd love to continue that conversation here. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the username at NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about the light with you.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed this conversation, if you've enjoyed Marriage Month so far, or any of the other like 260 something episodes of No Script that we've got out there, recommend us to your family, your friends, anybody you know that likes conversations about literature, about themes, about writing, about theater. That's us. Send them our way. They can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, all the places where you get your podcasts. You can also like our Facebook page, and a link to the new episode appears every Monday when we publish. Till we're back next week with another episode of Marriage Month. That's Jackson. I'm Jacob. Thanks for joining us for No Script, the podcast.